So just as a background, EOPA works to protect our lands, waters, and democracy. And you can think of us in three arenas. One is the advocacy and education side, where we're focused on offshore wind in California, the make polluters pay in California. We worked a lot on the setbacks legislation before that. Going nationally, electric vehicles, climate finance, as well as other programs to phase out fossil fuels and improve our energy security. And internationally, it's a lot of work with the UN climate negotiations and a Ukraine energy security Marshall Plan. Then you have our education arm, which focuses on work with the University of San Francisco. And in that, we have a master's in public leadership and a certificate in public leadership. The master's is scholarship if you're a military family or veteran, and the certificate brings together elected officials, NGOs, and businesses from around the world. And then you compete for a policy prize, and the best policy prize gets some funding to go implement. The Ukraine Energy Security Marshall Plan won on the international side, and more locally at a state level, climate resilience through mental health won when the budget chair and the vice speaker got together from Hawaii after the Maui fires. And that won the policy prize there. It passed the legislature. And then Benioff's foundation was kind enough to double the number of schools in Maui. So some wonderful policy actually becoming reality coming out of that program. And that's open to any elected official, NGO, business, and philanthropy. About 2/3 electeds attend that. And then the last bit is our media support. So we have a book publishing arm through the Solon Center for Research and Publishing, a podcast. And because lawmakers don't really read white papers, they piled up on my desk, we make short videos as well for the elected officials that they can put out there, because we found that if you put us in a video, we'll show our friends. So from there, we work together to highlight these issues, but also provide a resource for elected officials across locally to international. So with that, we're going to do a very quick version of some of the work we do on how to communicate this and combat the disinformation that's coming out, right? So to that 40% who have heard about the whales, for instance, this can be very interesting to look at. And just backing up a little bit, we found that fossil fuels have put a lot of money into combating offshore wind. Just on the East Coast, so the University, Brown University, found over $16 million put into these organizations here. And that definitely had impact in New Jersey. And so similarly, on the 118th Congress, they looked at all the different hearings, the committee reports and so forth, where it talked about offshore wind. And in that, for instance, conspiracy theories were utilized 85 times, including 49 statements that implied notorious intent of the offshore wind industry. So you can see here, it's not just locally. They've been very, very deliberate about how to provide over $16 million to over 17 organizations to appear that it's grassroots and hold candlelight vigils for the whales on Christmas Eve, to providing the information in Congress so it creates an image that no one likes wind, right? And that's deliberately done through a very focused campaign of well-funded, to take the upper hand on the messaging strategy here. And the unfortunate thing is when people believe something and they hear these facts that are just completely false, they'll still believe it. And because of confirmation bias, they'll dig in on it actually, because challenging that means that they're wrong themselves, right? There's a famous case of this Filipino lieutenant from the Japanese military after World War II, kept fighting for another decade. And even when people told him the war was over and they had the king put the message out even, he wouldn't believe it because of confirmation bias that they thought they were using to trick it, right? So it's a strong emotion that people use. This photo here is the troops deployed to DC. And they said, oh, they don't even have hotel rooms. But If you've ever been in the military, you know we try to get sleep wherever we are. They're just trying to get a nap before the next working days, work effort, right? And if they're Marine Corps, they probably be throwing rocks at each other. Um, so the way you get around that in many ways is connecting on shared values first, right? So the folks, a couple here have been through our public leadership certificate program where we go through value-based communications and emotional intelligence and public leadership and reading body language. But those who haven't, it's really, really important that we come from a shared value standpoint. So what in those messaging, right, particularly for our Republican friends, is a shared value, right? So national security could be one, particularly on that. And if you think about it, however we structure ourselves in our communities to internationally around shared values, what would be an example of that? Anyone? Clint, you can think back to our time way back there. How do we structure ourselves locally, right? Are there liberal communities? Are there conservative communities, right? Right? Yes, ma'am. There, you think even countries have certain value sets? When you think of a country, do people coalesce around religious organizations, right? As that value sets. So pretty much everything we do, your groups of friends, do you think you have a shared value set with your groups of friends? So extremely locally, all the way to internationally, we focus on values. And so when we're communicating and you're aiming to reach an audience that needs to be persuaded of something, starting with those shared values is extremely important. Now, if you look at the core value sets too, which could be the same and many times different too, is what gets people motivated and out there and volunteering, right? So the Democrats were very much gung-ho and supporting our environmental groups. And that would be more towards the core value set and the environmental protection, right? Getting rid of pollution. Whereas the Republicans, that clearly wasn't the set in the polling here, right? So you're looking at using the shared values to build connection and persuasion, and the core values to motivate for volunteering and working together, right? So with that, if you noticed, Save the Right Whales, Environmental Progress, and American Coalition for Ocean Protection. Those are the names of the organizations that they created to get rid of offshore wind on the East Coast. And those are very deliberately named, right? If we look at that, saving, right? We can all agree that we want to save the whales. That would be a shared value set. Environmental progress. Is progress a value? Yeah. American Coalition for Ocean Protection. Where's the value set in that one? Protection, yes. So they know this, the other side, and they're doing it very well. And they're putting it into the names that they create. So it's a comprehensive media campaign that's well funded. So one way to, a strategy of thinking about, who's heard of Simon Sinek's Why Before What? Great. So if you think about how we communicate, we tend to go to the facts and figures first. And why is that? Yeah, I mean, we have all the good data, right? We're aligned with the science. We know the scientists. There's amazing amounts of wonderful data out there that just show that the other side's wrong. And we're right. The unfortunate thing is, if I just said that, would that convince anyone? No, exactly. In fact, they would dig in and find their facts, right? So what we are looking at doing is go connect on the why first. What is the value set first? And this comes from the theory of be do have versus have do be. And it's a social theory, essentially. If you have something, you do something with it, and then you have a result. Now, is that mostly how many things are marketed in the US? I have my brand new car, I drive it, and I do something with it. I have my wedding ring, I get married, I do something with it. I have a nice, yummy cake, and I eat it all up, and then eat it, and I'll be happy, right? How do you think that's over and over programmed into us? What would be another example, anyone? If I have something, I do something with it, and I'll be happy. Yeah, the Coca-Cola does this very well because it's designed to be disposable and you need it again to be happy, right? The problem is it's short-lived. So if we flip it into the way of being, and then you do something with that, and then you create a result. And that's what Simon Sinek did brilliantly when he created why before what. He looked at the way of being, what is that why, the core value set, and then the do something with it and we have a result. So when in doubt, think why before what. Talk about the why, the value, and then the facts are the what. And if you're on stage and it's hard to remember, just why before what. And so with that, we can think about it, how do you operationalize that in many ways? And because the B is your way of being, the value sets. Dr. King was excellent at this, right? He didn't say, I have a 5-point plan. No, he said, I have a dream, right? That's together with everyone. And he did something with that. He's a great orator. And then we have the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. You can see there's Apple and other corporates who have done really well using this model too, ironically. Apple, its original story was when they had the lady go up there and throw that sledgehammer into the big brother stuffed up IBM. Their why was everyone gets to have a computer, not just the white stuffy dudes. Unfortunately, they're probably the other way around now because they want you to buy lots of iPhones. But so let's look at how do we build that connection when chatting with someone who might be on the edge. Now, the people who are off the charts and they're just dug in, probably not worth the time, right? Probably to get them to chat with someone over here while we're having a real conversation here. So, but for those who are open to real discussion, what we're looking at, again, the way of being first. And so if we go in all gung-ho and we're right and we're going to prove our point, is that going to work? Probably not, right? There may be some audiences where you beat them in the submission that Trump likes talking to, or that, but most people, if you come in and yell at them, it's not going to work, right? In fact, there's a lot of science out there that looks at how you listen is a form of persuasion. And so the studies are fascinating because if they understand you're truly listening, then their stance becomes softer. And so the advocates yelling with the bill horns at the politicians, it makes a good photo, but is it actually creating a persuasion? Probably not. So first step is you calming down your own parasympathetic nervous system, right? So we can come in here balanced. And then chat with the person and be like, hey, we're going to agree to debate to learn. We're not going to agree to debate to win. We just want to learn something from each other. And if both can agree on that, then great, let's have a good discussion. If they can't get past that stage, honestly, it's probably not worth the time unless you want to be entertained. I mean, I was on a plane next to someone who didn't believe in the moon landing. And I was like, oh gosh, okay, 5 hours. And I was like, okay, tell me more. let's have some fun. However, moving from there, so once we agree to debate to learn something, thinking about perspective taking, what empathy can I have for the other side, right? We have no idea sometimes what that population or that person has gone through that's led to this world mindset, right? So aiming to understand that is important. And then you're looking for connection, not correction. Because the moment you interrupt and say, no, that's wrong, you've now created a barrier. So even though something they might say might be wide off track at the time, just listen. And then there's an opportunity later to do the correction through a story. So through a story, because when it's in a story, people can relate to that and then start to visualize ways of thinking of like, okay, here's how I can frame my own narrative so where I can still be right in many ways, but maybe I'll tweak this and think about moving ahead. Because you're very unlikely to change someone's worldview, but you are potentially going to change the perspective on it, right? So this is something to think about when you're in the communities and chatting with people. Not always going to follow this outline or anything like that, but some tools. And the best way, honestly, to create that connection through the shared values and provide that nudge of, hey, the whales are best way to protect them is by combating climate change. And unfortunately, fishing is what really is killing them, and acidification and the lack of their ability to get food from climate change is through a story. So I'm going to play a 2-minute video about the importance of stories. And Clint, thanks for sitting through this again. And Marilyn, thanks for.
Okay, let's resist the urge to start with once upon a time. But to understand why storytelling is important to you, your company, your brands, or your corporate reputation today, we're going to have to go back a bit. The origin of the importance of stories lies in their power to explain. For ancient man, when the crops failed, he wanted to know why. The storytellers that could provide the most engaging explanations for the actions of the gods acquired the biggest and most attentive audiences and began to assume positions of authority. Thus, the rise of the priests, judges and rulers, and eventually the popularity of the BBC, Google, and the world's largest repository of personal stories, Facebook. Neurological research shows that our brains, despite evolution, still look for the story to make sense of information today. In fact, in the landmark Hyder and Symbol study, people interpreted a simple animation involving two triangles, a circle and a square, as a torrid tale of love, promiscuity, and domestic violence. Conveyed in story form, especially visual stories, versus concepts explained with logic and analysis, naturally imprint themselves into the brain faster. Stories are also universal, crossing boundaries of culture, language, gender, and age. They're told and retold, building and preserving a group sense of community. Stories align and motivate by portraying the world in terms that build emotional connections between people and create a sense of shared purpose. In an age of ever-increasing noise, in which we send 1 billion tweets a week, read around 10 megabytes of material a day, hear 400 meg, and see 1 meg of information every second, attention is worth more than ever before. And nothing holds attention like a great story.
Great. So after the story, we give the data, right? So a long way to say, one of the best ways to get the attention that's lasting and memorable is data makes us credible, but stories will make us memorable. And so if we were to put this all together and you're writing an op-ed, for instance, who here has had to do like the Princeton style op-ed in class or sometime in your life? Oh, you guys are all lucky you escaped it. Just enough. Just enough. So it's very formulaic in some ways, how we're told, hey, here's my thesis, here's the other side, and then here's how we debunk the other side, and here's the facts that back it up. Does that actually work to persuade people? Maybe some, like, what certain small percentage of the population is really big on facts and figures. But like we said earlier, the shared values section, right, of the population, the storytelling, brings an opening to look at the facts and figures. And so it's really important, if you actually were to create an op-ed and look at the social science, starting with the value proposition, that's a shared value, telling a story that illustrates it, that engages emotionally, then you move to the facts, because the facts are still important. Science is really important still. Maybe 3 of them in groups of 3 are usually a good thing. And then distinguishing, like, what's important about this, and then the call to action, right? That's much more effective op-ed than saying, here's the academic Princeton, Harvard way to do it. So just putting it together when we're working on these things to support offshore wind. Just here are a few tools. We'll send the slides out so you can also have that as well.